everyone. We have a couple more minutes to go before we start our live video session, but I just wanted to give this a test and make sure that everybody can hear my audio loud and clear before we get started. So if you're tuned in and you can't hear me, but you see my mouth moving, let me know so I can make sure I get that audio fixed for y'all. If I don't see any comments, I'm assuming y'all can hear me and it's good to go. I'm going to check on my phone and see if I can hear me through there too, so I can do a self-check real quick. All right, so I see me on here, but can I hear me? Let's find out. All right, so I'm not hearing any. There I go. I'm hearing audio, so that means we're good to go. We're going to wait a couple more minutes while everybody else tunes in. If you have questions right off the bat, feel free to post them down there in the chat section, and I can already start answering a couple of those for you guys. But we do still have 2 more minutes to go, so I'm not going to get in depth yet on any of my content, but you're still welcome to ask your questions. I'm going to walk over here for just a second, and I'll be right back. Okay, guys, I'm back, and welcome to my Craft Source YouTube channel. Today, we're hosting this live session to answer any questions you might have on epoxy tumblers. So the epoxy tumbler craze has sort of swept the crafting world by a storm, and we're starting to dabble in creating a couple of these. And I've been seeing more and more questions posted on Facebook about how to get started doing the epoxy tumblers. So we've been the last week kind of experimenting and trying out for ourselves some of the epoxy tumbler tips and techniques that are around the internet to try to come and provide some helpful information for everybody out there who wants to get started making epoxy tumblers. So if you've been thinking about doing the epoxy tumblers and you just don't know where to get started, then I hope you'll keep tuning in as we post different videos in the future on the different techniques and the different tips on making these epoxy tumblers. So we went ahead and built us a couple different turners to use when making our tumblers. So we've got sort of a rotisserie style tumbler. I'm going to show you the nitty-gritty I just need a tumbler turner technique also, which just uses maybe $5 worth of equipment. And that is perfect for somebody that just wants to create a tumbler for personal use. I mean, I wouldn't go into big business doing it that way because it definitely is a time-consuming version of the cuptisserie. So if you are joining us today, welcome, and ask away any questions you might have during this live session as I go over a few things that we have sort of created to make our epoxy tumblers and some of the supplies you'll need to make epoxy tumblers. And then we'll also down the road offer another live session with an epoxy tumbler expert who makes these online and sells them, and she does it all the time. So she will know far more troubleshooting tips, things that she struggled with starting up, and things that she's learned along her way. So that'll be a different live session that we'll do in the future. And I can post info about that at the end of our session, maybe in the comments for y'all to follow along. Also, this live video will be posted on our YouTube channel for reference. So if in the future you forgot something that we've talked about on here and would like to reference it again, you can go back to our YouTube channel and watch this video all over again. So welcome, guys, and let's get started. So what is epoxy anyways? Epoxy is a resin that is a 2-part mixture. So when using epoxy, you have a hardener and you have a resin. And they'll be in 2 separate bottles that you then mix together at a 1-to-1 ratio. And this is the most common problem that people have is they go to mix their epoxy and that 1-to-1 ratio is off by the tiniest amount. And that creates a world of problems in the end for your tumblers. So with epoxy, you want to use some sort of a measuring cup to ensure that you're getting the right ratio. We've got these little solo cups that have lines on them, and we use that line as our reference guide to know how much hardener we need to use to resin ratio. If you want to get extremely technical and you want to be fail-safe, then you could get a scale and you could weigh out your mixture so that way you're ensured to get the proper mix when mixing your epoxy. So we have used this epoxy lately. This is something we picked up from Hobby Lobby. It's an easy cast, clear casting epoxy, and it's worked great so far. And it goes a long ways. I'm not sure how many cups you'll be making at the startup, but I mean, we've made maybe 5 cups with it so far, and we still have a quarter of the bottle left. So I would say that's a pretty good turnaround with this stuff. So you'll see the hardener in its own bottle, and then you'll see the resin in its own bottle. So that epoxy will not harden until you've mixed the 2 together to create a chemical reaction, which then starts the cure process. Something to keep in mind when mixing your epoxy. After you have combined the 2 parts liquid together and you use, I don't know, we use a popsicle stick to stir. I don't know if I have one of those over here. I didn't bring one by. But once you start stirring with your popsicle stick, you want to make sure you're not mixing super fast because that's going to create a lot of air bubbles inside your mixture. And air bubbles on your tumbler do not look pretty. I mean, there is a way to help smooth them out, and we'll go over that eventually. But the less air bubbles, the better. So in this situation, you want to make sure when you're stirring your epoxy, you do it in a nice, slow, even manner to make sure you're avoiding adding any extra air bubbles to the mix. You're going to stir for 2 to 3 minutes to make sure that it's all the way combined, because with epoxy, you could run into the problem of not mixing it enough to where the hardener doesn't touch all the resin. So then you'd have spots in your mixture that don't set properly. So when you first pour your epoxy, it'll be sort of a cloudy finish. And as you mix, you'll begin to notice the 2 combining and making a more clear consistency in your cups. So once it's completely clear and once you've mixed for 2 to 3 minutes, then it's time to start using your epoxy. So what about the cup prep? When you go to prep your cup, you're just going to use sort of like a stainless steel tumbler like you see the Yetis or, Walmart's got a few brands that are sometimes powder coated, which the powder coating actually doesn't, from what we've tested anyways, the powder coating doesn't affect the way the epoxy applies. So those are fine too. We have been using the stainless steel tumblers, and generally you want to wash and dry your cup completely before you get started. And then you're going to take just some painter's tape, and you want to put this painter's tape around the rim of your cup. If you don't like the feeling of the epoxy when drinking out of your tumbler, that's when you put it on the outside of your cup like this to make sure that you're going to be touching the stainless steel with your mouth instead of any other resin. If that doesn't bother you, then you could tape the inside so you don't have to sand it as much once you're done. I actually did my cup without taping it, and on the rim you can see a little remnants of the epoxy where it has a texture to it. I've not sanded this one yet because I wanted you guys to see the effect of not taping the rim has. But you can go back with a fine grade sandpaper, sort of like a mirror finish. It would be like 1,000 grit or higher, and you can sand the edges of your lip, and then you don't have to worry about taping in that sense. Something else I've seen people do is tape the bottoms of their cups because you don't want it to get uneven to where whenever you sit your cup down, it's kind of a rocky, unlevel surface. But I didn't tape mine, and mine turned out pretty good also. I think it's all a matter of user application. When you're using the epoxy, how are you letting it run off? Are you letting it drip on the bottom? Are you jamming it up with lots of glitter and texture? Those are all things you've got to consider when making your tumbler. So as long as you're keeping the end product in mind as you go, then you'll know what's right for you. Do I need to tape it? Do I just let it go and don't tape it? I have a preference of not taping it because I don't enjoy seeing that stainless steel band around the top. But also the texture doesn't bother me when I'm drinking out of it because usually I have the lid on it and I'm drinking out of the lid. And quite frankly, I love to use straws anyways. So having my epoxy and my finish go to the top is more of my preference. So I'm not going to tape any of my tumblers as I go along. Here's an example of a tumbler that has been taped along the rim. So you can see that effect. It leaves that silver band at the top of the stainless steel. All right, so now that we've touched on taping off our tumblers, let's move on to the next step. So once you've cleaned and taped off your tumbler, that's when you go and apply your first finish. There's many techniques that you could use when making tumblers. You could use the dip method where you spray your tumbler colors that you wish to use. So if we wanted to use this pink spray paint, for instance, we would fill a bucket of water. So I would just take a bucket like this, fill it with water, and then take the spray paint and spray my colors that I want to dip my cup in into the water. Make sure you're in a well-ventilated area, by the way, and wear masks if you want to not deal with all those respiratory issues with that paint going up in your lungs later, because I made the mistake of not doing that, and I suffered with allergies all night the next day, so wear a mask. So spray your spray paint into your water bucket, and then you just take your tumbler and you dip it into the water while swirling it, and it gets this nice marbled effect on your tumbler. So that's one application that you could use to create a unique finish on your tumbler. If you want to do a glitter tumbler, then you would just simply take your tumbler and apply some Mod Podge all over the surface. And once you have done that, you take your glitter and you pour your glitter over it. And then you let that dry completely before you apply another coat of Mod Podge over that glitter to seal it in. Once that's dried, that's when you apply the epoxy. And with the marbled effect, after you've let it dry, you then apply your epoxy. So there's a lot of techniques that you could use when making these glitter tumblers. And we hope to soon have some in-depth videos for you guys on which techniques you might like. So we'll be posting a video on making a glitter tumbler, making a marble tumbler, making a geode tumbler, and the fabric epoxy tumblers. So with the fabric tumblers, you're just going to Mod Podge fabric onto your tumblers and then apply epoxy coat over it. And then you can always use your personal cutter to cut vinyl, stickers, decals onto your tumbler before you seal it with epoxy again. So possibilities are endless with which technique you end up using for your designs. Something else that we have found helpful is to keep a heat gun on hand. So when you pour your epoxy onto your cup, so I'm going to show you an example of our turner. So this sticks in there, and our tumbler sits right here on the rotisserie or cuptisserie, and it'll spin around. So once we've poured our epoxy over our tumbler, it is handy to have a drip tray. It would spin around and self-level. So epoxy is UV resistant, it's waterproof, and it self-levels. And that's why epoxy is the best choice for your final coat on your tumblers. There are techniques out there that use just Mod Podge to seal it, or a polyurethane coat to seal it. Polyurethane tends to yellow. Mod Podge, when left to soak or get wet, sometimes gets cloudy. Epoxy doesn't have any of that. And that's why the epoxy is such a great choice for sealing your tumblers. So once you've put your coat on of epoxy and it's turning, you start to notice that you get little air bubbles in your finish. So how do you fix that? That's when you take your heat gun and you apply heat to your tumbler surface to help remove any of those air bubbles, and it'll help self-level that epoxy a little bit. So the heat gun, if you get too close, could cause problems. So you don't want to scorch your tumbler. You just want to apply some subtle heat to help even out the finish and to remove those air bubbles. Something we have found that was real useful is to get a silicone little rubber spoon or barbecue brush. This is great for smoothing out any of the epoxy once you've poured it on. This will help ensure that you're getting a nice even coverage on your tumblers. So once you've gotten your even coat and you've removed your air bubbles, that's when the waiting game begins. So it takes generally 4 to 6 hours for your epoxy to begin to set. It's gonna start getting sticky and then it'll finally cure after the 6 hours. So you want your cup to be turning for the full time of curing, and then after that 4 to 6 hours you can generally turn it off. Now cure times are going to be affected by temperature, so the prime temperature is going to be between 60 and 90 degrees. Anything colder is going to take longer to cure. Anything warmer will cure faster. So it's nice to have a controlled environment that you're working on your tumblers with. Something we've found out is that epoxy is super sticky. So in the end, if you're outside and these are turning outside, you could end up with grass, pollen, bugs, dirt, debris that you don't want in your nice, smooth, shiny finish. So a controlled environment like a garage is definitely going to be a better choice than outdoor in the elements where things can get stuck to your cup. We've even had issues inside with things coming and getting stuck on our cup. So it's wise to be observing your cup from time to time. So if you do happen to have something land on your shiny epoxy finish while it's not quite cured, you can go remove it and let it self-level again before your cup cures with that debris stuck inside it. Because once it's there, it's there. Now, with epoxy, after it's cured, you can sand the finish. So if you found that maybe your cup had a little bit of a bumpy finish on it underneath, and as the epoxy rolled around it, it just kind of followed that contour of the bumps, so you didn't like it in the end, you can go back with a sanding block or sandpaper and a little bit of water and squirt the area with the water and sand down the little bit of texture that you're displeased with. And the finer grit sandpaper is going to be great as a finishing touch after you've gone with a rougher grit. So this is like a 400 grit sandpaper. So I sand the big chunk with this, and then I'm going to go up to the 1000, work my way up to the 1000 grit sandpaper to get that nice mirror-like finish on the spot that I sanded, while using the water to help keep the dust down and to create a nice mirror-like finish. All is not lost if you happen to have a bump or a little texture on your epoxy finish. Of course, in the perfect world, we hope that it's going to be completely smooth, but sometimes that just doesn't happen. So do not throw your project away. There's still a little bit of way to save it. So what else can we talk about today? So we talked about pre-mixture, getting your ratios right, trying to avoid air bubbles. We've talked about application. We don't want debris in our cup. We don't want air bubbles in our cup. The heat helps self-level the epoxy. And post-application, we talked about the perfect temperature for curing is 60 to 90 degrees. We don't want flies and dust in our tumblers. So I think we've touched bases on a lot of the epoxy techniques. So what about a turner? So a lot of people are wanting to build their own turners. Of course, Amazon offers some that are pre-built already, but who has the time to wait on shipping? When you're like us, we wanted to dive into something right now. So we went to Home Depot and found what we could find locally so we could get started right away with our turners. So the one you see here, this turner was actually a rotisserie stand that we purchased at Home Depot. So this was at our local store, and we just bought us a 2x4. This is a plumbing PVC donut that was in the plumbing section. It's got this kind of a rubber gripper on it, and it works great for these stainless steel tumblers. Plus, it's not as big as these foam footballs that you see everybody using. So it fits down in both our larger cups and our nice skinny cups whenever you push it on there. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn my phone on silent. So with this turner that we built, we just simply cut a 2x4 down, screwed them together, and applied our rotisserie directly to our 2x4 U here. And that was a quick, simple, maybe took less than 30 minutes to build. And the total cost for this was about $50. So that's not the cheapest way to build one, for sure. Now, we do have the nitty-gritty $5 fix, and that consists of using just a cardboard box that we cut a hole in. I'm sure you can see the little hole there. And a wooden dowel that we glued with Gorilla Glue, a football directly onto our dowel. So this cost us about $5. $3 of it was the glue, $1 for this, and $1 for the rod. So if you have Gorilla Glue on hand already, then you're already cheaper than what we spent. So with this, you just are gonna stick it through the hole of your cardboard box And with this one, you can actually put 2 cups on at the same time. The only downfall is that you have to make sure that you are watching your turner all day long, because with this, you're going to be turning your cups every 10 to 15 minutes initially, which is very time consuming. And you definitely have to make sure you set your timer to remember to come and do it, or you're going to end up with an uneven finish. So with this football option, you just take your cup, you squeeze the football in there, and voila, you have your cup turner. So we actually did my first coat on this epoxy cup with this turner, and it turned out pretty good, actually. So 4 to 6 hours is what it takes to cure. For the first 30 minutes while using this self-turning, manual turning cup turner, I was turning it every 10 to 20 minutes. And I had a timer set for the first 3 hours of going every 10 to 20 minutes and turning it to make sure I was getting an even application of my epoxy from running off. After your epoxy begins to cure, then it's not as essential that you go back and turn it so often. So we then just kind of came back every hour or so and turned it once it started curing. And it gave me a pretty even finish. I was actually surprised at how well it turned out. So with that in mind, for $5, you can go create this contraption and make your own cup turner. Plus, it's 2-sided, so you can do 2 cups at the same time. So this one is sort of the set it and forget it, let it turn ordeal. And this one is the manual $5. I'm just going to do something for myself turner. And it still worked out great. So now that we've gone over turners, that's about it for this session. Like I said before, keep tuning in to our YouTube channel. We hope to get more videos from start to finish on making epoxy tumblers. We'll probably have a session on glitter tumblers. We'll have a session on the geo tumblers. And eventually we'll get to the fabric tumblers as well. And keep looking back at our channel for our live interview with our epoxy tumbler expert. And if you have questions, always send them to our channel and we'll be happy to answer them for you. Thank you guys for tuning in. It was great to see you guys today, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Goodbye for now.